In a quiet English village, life flowed slowly, wrapped in the rhythmic calm of rural charm and routine. But in the grand manor house on the outskirts of town, a storm brewed within the walls, concealed by the cold, white bricks. James Turner, a wealthy businessman in his late 40s, had once thought his wife, Claire, the picture of loyalty and love. However, suspicion had long gripped him with icy fingers. Something was wrong. Claire had grown distant, her laughter a rare sound, her gaze often far off. One evening, unable to bear the silence any longer, James decided to dig into the secrets of his own household. He hired a private investigator, who, after only a few weeks, brought back the news James had feared. Claire was entangled in a love affair. Her lover was not some local gentleman nor a business associate. It was someone he had never expected. A young man, Adnan Rahman, the son of a Muslim family who lived a few houses down, newly moved from London to escape the city's relentless pace. James was furious, but more than that, he was humiliated. A man of his standing could not simply confront his wife about her betrayal. It had to be more calculated, more punishing. The only solace he could find was in revenge. He planned a confrontation, but not before he'd gathered his facts, his evidence. The texts, the late-night rendezvous, the whispered promises between his wife and this young neighbor. Each discovery was a fresh wound that he nursed with bitterness until the night he was ready. On a stormy evening, when Claire returned home from a supposed late dinner with friends, James waited for her in the dim light of their drawing room, a glass of scotch in hand and his eyes burning with rage. He wasted no time in throwing her deception in her face, laying out every sordid detail he'd uncovered. Claire's shock was visible, but so was something else. A strange kind of defiance. She had not expected him to react this way. She had thought James might forgive her, might let her go quietly. Instead, she saw a man unhinged, a man who seemed intent on revenge. In the midst of their argument, James threatened to expose the affair to the entire village. He intended to drag Adnan's family's name through the mud, to make them outcasts, destroying the reputation they had worked to build since moving in. Driven to a breaking point, Claire pleaded with James, begging him to spare Adnan, to let them walk away. But James was unrelenting. What happened next unfolded quickly. Claire, cornered and desperate, lashed out in fury. In the struggle that followed, she grabbed the nearest object, a marble bookend, and struck James in a blind panic. James stumbled, his eyes wide with shock, and fell backward, hitting his head on the edge of the coffee table with a sickening thud. As the storm outside raged on, the silence in the room was absolute. Claire, panting and numb, looked down at her husband's lifeless body. She hadn't meant to kill him, but it was done. After a few minutes of stunned immobility, Claire's mind raced. She needed a story. She needed an escape. In the early hours of the morning, she fled the house, driving off into the night, knowing that by the time the police found James's body, she would be far from the quiet village, taking her secrets and her guilt along with her into the unknown. The morning after, the village awoke to a scene of horror as police cars lined the driveway of the Grand Manor. James Turner's death sent shockwaves through the close-knit community, his body discovered by the housekeeper, who had arrived early, expecting to find the Turners asleep. Instead, she was greeted by the ghastly sight of blood pooling beneath his motionless form. The police immediately noted signs of a struggle. A broken vase, overturned furniture, and it was clear to everyone that this was no accident. The investigator leading the case, Detective Inspector Margaret Holden, was a sharp-minded, seasoned detective. She walked through the scene, piecing together the events with a practiced eye. But there was one glaring mystery. Claire was missing. Neighbors reported seeing her car leave late in the night. No one knew where she'd gone, but rumors spread like wildfire. Had she killed James in cold blood? Was this part of some dark plan? And where had she fled? Claire's disappearance only added fuel to the mystery. A missing wife suddenly turned suspect. As Detective Holden started to comb through James's life, she discovered the bitter truth buried beneath the surface. Witnesses came forward anonymously, whispering about seeing Claire and Adnan together, exchanged glances in public, a hidden rendezvous here and there. Adnan's name began to surface repeatedly, and the gossip transformed into a full-blown scandal. Holden paid a visit to Adnan's family. The Rahmans, devout and quiet, were mortified to find their son implicated in such a grisly affair. They claimed to have no idea of any relationship between Adnan and Claire, but Adnan's reaction told another story. Pale and visibly shaken, Adnan stammered through his statements, refusing to meet Holden's gaze. He insisted that he had seen Claire only briefly, that there was nothing between them, but his trembling hands betrayed him. Under pressure from the detective, Adnan finally confessed to the affair. He spoke of stolen moments and forbidden feelings, of the danger that had added a thrill to their connection. But he swore that he had not seen Claire in over a week, claiming he had wanted to end the affair, knowing it could ruin both their lives. Despite his insistence on innocence in James's death, suspicion clung to him like a shadow. Detective Holden knew he was hiding something. But what? The hunt for Claire became a nationwide story. Headlines screamed of the fugitive wife and her lover, and the media painted Claire as a cold-blooded killer, a wealthy woman who had turned to passion and murder to escape her marriage. Yet the mystery remained unsolved. Claire had vanished without a trace. A month passed and Holden grew frustrated. Leads had dried up, and Adnan, despite his nervous demeanor, had managed to clear his name of any direct involvement in James's murder. But then, just as it seemed the case might go cold, an anonymous tip came in. It was brief and cryptic. A note mailed to the police station that simply read, "Check the lake." The message jolted Holden's instincts. That very afternoon, she led a team to the lake, a secluded spot where young lovers and nighttime wanderers had often been spotted. As the divers combed the lakebed, a grisly discovery was made. Claire's car lay submerged in the murky depths, twisted and rusted, but with no sign of Claire herself. Only her handbag was found, left deliberately on the passenger seat with a lone, telling item inside, her wedding ring. The police searched for any sign of her in the surrounding woods, hoping to uncover clues. But Claire seemed to have evaporated into thin air, leaving only echoes of her betrayal and rage behind. Some whispered that she had fled the country, hiding in some distant land to evade justice. Others speculated a darker fate, that perhaps she had ended her own life, unable to bear the weight of her crime. But Detective Holden wasn't convinced. To her, the scene at the lake felt too staged, too carefully orchestrated. And then, in a chilling moment of realization, she considered a possibility she hadn't yet entertained. What if Claire was still out there, watching them all from the shadows, waiting for the perfect moment to reemerge and rewrite her own story? Only time would reveal the final truth. But one thing was certain. The secrets of the Turner affair were far from buried. Weeks passed, and the village, though still shaken, began to return to its normal pace. The whispers about Claire's fate faded, reduced to ghostly murmurs in coffee shops and evening pubs. Some claimed she had drowned in the lake. Others insisted she was living under a false identity, slipping past authorities with a clever disguise. But Detective Inspector Margaret Holden couldn't let go of the feeling that something was amiss. She was convinced that Claire Turner's story wasn't over. Her hunch was proven right one gray morning when another message arrived at the police station. This time it wasn't anonymous. It was signed by Claire Turner herself. The letter, written in Claire's neat handwriting, was sent from a remote village in France. It read more like a confession than a farewell. She wrote of her betrayal, of how love had driven her to the edge. She admitted to her affair with Adnan, a reckless escape from a loveless marriage. She detailed how James had found out and how she had panicked, leading to that fatal, unplanned strike. The words were hauntingly raw, each one a plea for understanding, perhaps even forgiveness. But the end of the letter held the most chilling line of all. "You may find me if you wish, but I am beyond the reach of your justice now." Despite the confidence in her words, Detective Holden knew Claire was taunting her. The detective flew to France with the hope of tracking Claire's movements through the few clues she'd left behind in her letter. There, in a small vineyard town, she uncovered hints of Claire's presence. A shopkeeper who remembered her face, a forgotten scarf in a rented room, a ticket stub to a ferry along the coast. Holden finally traced Claire to a cliffside cottage overlooking the rugged, windswept ocean. She found the door unlocked and pushed it open, bracing herself for what lay beyond. The room was simple, stripped of personal touches except for a single framed photograph on the table. It was a picture of Claire and James in happier times, smiling under the sunlit sky, and next to it lay Claire's passport, open to the page with her solemn photograph. But the cottage was empty, and the only sign of life was a note left on the windowsill, its words fluttering in the salty breeze. I have taken back my life, Margaret. Please, let me rest in peace. Holden scanned the surrounding cliffs and the churning sea below, half expecting to see Claire standing on the precipice. But she knew in her heart that Claire was gone. The case had come full circle, not to the justice Holden had hoped for, but to an ending forged by Claire herself. As the detective walked away from the cliff, a heavy silence fell over the scene. She knew the truth would remain locked within the shadows of that fateful night, buried with Claire in a story only she would ever fully understand.